Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the third session of our Transform event, Transform the Circular Economy, and welcome. My name is Abdul Salam Busalim, and I'll be your MC for today's session with Federica. So as you may know, the Transform series is a new free online seminar that explores the growing impact of digital transformation on business and society. And we will be covering a total of 6 areas, ranging from the future of work to smart cities and communities, circular economies, and many more. So today, however, we are looking at the 6th area of the 6 of these areas by focusing on how digital technology are impacting the circular economy. And we're delighted to be joined by Federica Doni, who is an associate professor in business administration and accounting at the University of Milano-Bicocca. Federica will be discussing SDG 13, which is the climate action. So feel free to send in your questions during the session using the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. And please be aware that the chat function is disabled. So only use the Q&A tab. We will then compile the questions and I'll ask Federica to address as many as she can, and that is possible in the time available. So looking forward to your questions, and please use the Q&A function as the chat is disabled. Okay. So without further delay, I'll hand you to the panel, Federica. So when you're ready.
Yes. Yes. Good afternoon. And I'm trying to share with you my screen. Okay. So thank you so much for inviting me at this serious seminars, I think, in your university, in your business school. I am a professor in business administration, so I'm very happy to be here with the students that I think you are studying also business administration or financial reporting, accounting, and so on. But now I'm going to talk with you, to discuss with you about the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly number 13 on climate action. Because I wrote recently a concise guides published by Emerald. This book is a short book in a series edited by Professor Walter Leal Philo, who is the head of a very important European school on sustainability and on sustainable development goals. And this professor invited me to write this concise guide on the Sustainable Development Goal number 13. So we are going to the first slide. I don't know if you read the content of this Sustainable Development Goal. I think that climate change is a very well-known topic now, because every day, I think, and particularly young people, I used to hear this name because, for example, I remember, I'm not a young student now, obviously, but I remember that when I was young, it is not possible to hear about climate change. It's an unusual thing many years ago. And now I'm going to explain very briefly the content of this SDG, and particularly I would like to explain you how countries, how governments, how citizens, how companies can implement this very, very important sustainable development goal in our life, in our planet, and also in our working place, for example. And it is very important to highlight that the contribution by the public sector, but also by the private sector, and especially by companies, by financial sector, is very, very important. And then I would like to talk with you about some recent trends about climate change and the enhancement of the link between climate change and business and finance. And especially from the European Commission, it is very important to consider that many initiatives by the European Commission are arising about this topic. So, a question, a very simple question for you in order to stimulate your attention, because in Italy now, but obviously in Dublin, in the early afternoon, I think it's simple to think to sleep now. So these images, I think can stimulate your attention, because this is a very important threat, risk for all people in the world about the climate change. And it is very important to think about all climate actions. What are we doing for fight, for prevent, or for stop this risk? And how can you define climate change or some examples of climate actions? Can you try to reply these questions? I don't know, but I would like to check the chat. Okay.
Federica, the chat will actually be off for this session. There'll just be questions in the Q&A at the end and during the session.
Okay, so we can move to the other slide. I think it is a stimulus for all students to think about the definition of the climate change and some examples for climate actions. Then, who is Greta Thunberg? Are you hearing about this nice girl? And for example, some questions for you. You agree with this statement? The Thunberg family scolds the world and does business. She's an activist with the mania for showing off. So I'm criticizing her behavior. She's influenced by politicians, maybe, or she's an opinion leader on environmental and climate change issues, maybe. Also this last reply for your comments. I think you saw many times Greta Thunberg in recent years, and probably you have some thoughts, or you considered her behavior, because she is affecting, she is influencing countries, politicians, governments, and she has a great impact on the perception of this topic in all countries in the world. So we can start to read the content of the Sustainable Development number 13, Climate Action. you can see that this Sustainable Development Goal includes 5 targets. Okay, the first one, strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards and disasters in all countries. It's a very impressive target, hazards, okay? And resilience, it's another usual word. I think you are hearing this word many times. The second target, integrate climate change measures into national policies, strategies, and planning. And I think these words are usual for you because, for example, not only I'm referring to national policies, but also companies' policies, strategies, and planning in order to integrate, and this is a strong word, integrate climate change measures in order to highlight the effectiveness of this integration. Okay, it is very important to emphasize this aspect. The third one, improve education. And this is my role now in order to stimulate your knowledge on these topics, okay? And it is very important because young people will be the main responsible for the future on the climate action, okay? So it is very important an improvement in teaching at all levels of education, at primary level, at secondary level, at university level, okay? So it is very, very important in order to stimulate awareness rising and human institutional capacity on change, mitigation, adaptation, and so on. The fourth one, implement a commitment undertaken by developed country parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to a goal of mobilizing jointly 100 billion annually by 2020 from all sources to address the needs of developing countries in the context of meaningful mitigation actions and transparency on the implementation and fully operationalize the Green Climate Fund through its capitalization as soon as possible. And we are considering the essential role played by capitals, by finance, because we need money in order to make concrete these climate actions. Okay, without money, it's not possible to stop the risk of climate change. And so developed countries have to play an important role in order to reorient all capitals to green actions, okay? So in this case, all financial institutions, banks, at the global level, at the European level, especially in the developed countries, have to play an essential role in order to support, in order to help developing countries which do not have money or capitals in order to prevent, in order to fight all climate risks, okay? And finally, the fifth target is to promote mechanisms for rising capacity for effective climate change related planning and management in least developed countries and small island developing states, including focusing on women, youth, and local and marginalized communities. You have to note that this final target, it is very important in order to link the Sustainable Development Goal number 13 with other SDGs, such as, for example, the SDG on gender equality, or on inclusivity, inclusion, and so on. Okay, it is very important because climate action is not a standalone sustainable development goal, but it is very important to highlight the consideration of these categories, for example, women, young people, or marginalized people in developing countries. So in this slide, I tried to summarize some definitions, okay, from literature about the definition of the climate change, because we can select some goal concepts about these SDG, climate change in general, but also climate change vulnerability or climate change impacts. Consider that I don't have a specific knowledge on these terms, but I'm trying to improve my knowledge on these terms, because consider that when I talk with some managers, a specific need now is to include in the boards, especially in the listed companies, a scientist or a biological engineer, for example, because managers have to collaborate with scientists, with some persons who have a specific knowledge on these scientific terms, scientific words. Okay, vulnerability, adaptation, resilience. Okay, for us, for scholars in business administration or in accounting, we do not have a specific knowledge on these terms. Okay. Climate change is a global change. It has to be considered as a global priority now, and it represents the biggest threat. But on the other hand, it represents the biggest opportunity for all countries in the world. Okay. It is very important to control the climate change vulnerability. If you consider specific, for example, small islands, because some countries have a specific risk related to natural hazards and so on. This is not the case, for example, in Italy or in UK or in other countries, but if you consider especially small islands in the world or other countries. Climate change impacts, it is a very important concept because all countries in the world have this risk, because climate change is affecting all people, all countries. Okay, climate change impacts are cross-sectoral and multidimensional and require cross-sectoral mitigation and adaptation approaches. It is very important that for fighting climate change risks, all sectors in all countries have to mobilize all tools in order to stop this risk. Okay, or to stop, I think this is an ambitious goal. Okay, we are considering some indicators, because SDG 13 shows 5 targets. Okay, we read these targets, but within each target we can read some indicators. Okay, for example, the target number 1 about resilience and about adaptive capacity refers to natural disasters. Okay, so we are referring to, for example, human impacts deriving from these natural disasters, about injuries, homelessness, affected, total number of affected, and consider that the figures related to natural disasters are very, very impressive. Okay. And also the economic impacts from natural disasters, not only for people, okay, but for companies, for our economy, for our money, okay. Deaths and injuries from natural disasters, national disaster risk management, because, for example, a company, okay, there is a specific risk related to rains, for example, or other natural hazards. This company has to sign a contract or a specific agreement with an insurance company in order to prevent this risk, in order to avoid a very important financial impact. Okay, because a company may be disappeared from the market if the impact from natural disasters is very, very relevant for this company. Okay. The target number 2, integrate climate change measures. Okay, this is very important, the measurement of the climate change. And it is very important to select specific measurements in order to adopt adequate policies, in order to plan. Okay, it is very important for this task. For governments, for organizations, for institutions, for all persons, for all people. Okay. First one, it is important to integrate this measurement into national policies. This is a specific responsibility, a specific commitment for all nations in the world. Okay, so there is a specific indicator has been defined as the number of countries that have communicated the establishment or operationalization of an integrated policy strategy plan, which increases their ability to adapt to the adverse impacts of climate change and foster climate resilience and low greenhouse gas emissions development. Okay, so this indicator and so on, other indicators, for example, the nationally determined contributions. These are specific indicators in order to measure the commitment of the government of a nation to combat climate change. Okay, and in order to read through figures, for example, the national CO2 emissions, per capita emissions, and carbon intensity measures. Number 3, build knowledge and capacity to meet climate change. And this is the concept about education. Okay, we can talk a lot of hours about this aspect. And I am a professor, so I think this is a very crucial aspect related to this sustainable development goal. What universities, what schools, what professors can do for improve education on climate change. Okay, for example, in the first semester, I taught, and for the first time, I introduced a little part on sustainable development goals in my course on business administration. Consider that I have around about 180 students in my classroom now. My teaching online, unfortunately, but I have a lot of students, and I think it is very important at the first year on the bachelor's degree to teach and to discuss with them about sustainable development goals, but not only in the university. I think it is very important to teach about these topics at all levels of the education courses, education program. Okay. It is very important about the target number 8 to implement the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And this is the aspect related to capitals, to money, to investments on the prevention and on climate actions, especially by developed countries. And there are some indicators, for example, the Green Climate Fund mobilization. There is an indicator that measures the current pledged commitments from countries to the Green Climate Fund. Okay, and there is a specific indication that requires a mobilization of 100 million per year from 2020 onwards. Then, to support countries in reaching these sustainable development goal targets, it is very important to adopt climate measures in 3 key action areas: climate change adaptation, zero carbon development, and scaled up climate finance. I'm checking the time, so if you want at the end, we can talk about examples, but now I prefer to move on other topics, but do not worry, because I can send you, or I can leave you this presentation. Okay. Climate change trends. Consider that in COP21 there was an important agreement, the climate change agreement, a very well-known event in Paris, and many countries signed this agreement. I think this is the first important signal at the global level in order to represent an important and urgent claim for the transition to the low carbon economy. Okay, this is an important transition to circular economy, and it is important that most of countries, or all countries in the world, are committing in this specific task. Okay. The commitment is on policies for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I think you know very well that there are 3 different kinds of greenhouse gas emissions: Scope 1 and Scope 2 and 3. Scope 1 is the direct emissions, and Scope 2 and 3 refer to indirect emissions. Climate change is a cross-cutting issue. Okay, so it is very important to consider the relationships between SDG 13 with other SDGs. Okay, because yes, it is important to consider climate actions and all policies we can adopt referring to climate change, but it is also important to consider other SDGs, and the achievement of these other SDGs can support the achievement of the SDG number 13. Okay, for example, there are other SDGs, for example, number 7, number 12, number 14, number 15, that support national action to combat climate change to enhance zero carbon growth. Okay, so yes, Sustainable Development Goal number 13 is a standalone, a focused goal on climate-specific actions in adaptation, mitigation, and finance at the global level, but it is also important to consider other SDGs in order to support the achievement of these specific SDGs. We can find some interesting studies about this aspect, or in other terms, about the interaction frameworks among sustainable development goals. For example, in this study, you can find an interesting connections, and the authors talked about pairs of SDGs that are correlated, and this interaction is very important, especially in some countries. For example, the pair SDG number 13 and SDG number 11 comes in at the first place in the top 10 synergies the authors highlighted in this study. And but for example, another important interaction is between the Sustainable Development Goal number 2 and number 13. And in this study, we can find the interactions also between the Sustainable Development Goal number 3, number 7, and number 13 with Sustainable Development Goal number 14. For example, the interaction between Sustainable Development Goal number 2 and Sustainable Development Goal number 13 refers to the role played by agriculture. Okay, because consider that agriculture is an important source of greenhouse gas emissions. Consider when you eat the meat, for example. Okay, consider that for producing this meat, farms produced a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so agriculture contributes to climate change. Conversely, climate change has wide-ranging impacts on agriculture and food security through extreme weather events, as well as long-term climate changes, such as warming and precipitation changes, and will significantly constrain the achievement of SDG 2. Sustainable agriculture practices play an important role in climate adaptation and mitigation. In summary, there is a bidirectional link between climate change, SDG 13, and the SDG number 2. Okay, consider the threat to food production can be seen as the greatest driver of climate change, yet sustainable agriculture can be part of the solution. Okay, so there is a bidirectional link, connection between these two different sustainable development goals. So, few words, I think, because I'm checking the time. I need more time, but I know very well that I have to to respect the timetable. So the last important concept, the contribution of the public sector and the contribution of the private sector. Okay, public sector, setting the local agenda, governments and public sector. What is the contribution of the governments and the public sector? Consider that all countries, there is no country in the world that is not experiencing firsthand the drastic effects of climate change. Greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise. They are now more than 50% higher than their 1990 level. Okay, very impressive figures. It's a sad situation, especially for you, for young students. Furthermore, global warming is generating long-lasting changes to the climate system, which threaten irreversible consequences if countries and governments do not take action now. Okay. Our governments organized are there powerful tools to combat climate action by governments. If you read these slides, you can find different tools by governments to check and to control these risks. Okay, and also, for example, intended national determined contribution, which are specific indicators on climate policies, and also other indicators on current policies adopted by governments. And some surveys highlighted that this is not a very good situation now in the world, because these indicators and current climate policies tracked by G20 countries are scarce, a poor contribution. Okay, and consider that the G20 countries are the most developed countries in the world. In some cases, critically insufficient to achieve the well below 2 centigrade objective of the Paris Climate Agreement. Okay, so we have to improve our actions about climate change. Consider that there is no common indicators among countries in the world. So in Italy, for example, the government adopts different indicators in comparison with the indicators adopted by UK and other countries. And it is not a correct situation. There are other public management tools, for example, incorporating sustainable development principles into regulatory governance. And also, for example, a very innovative tool refers to the democratic accountability through a participatory approach in order to stimulate the involvement of citizens in general. This is another important and powerful tool for governments, for local governments, in order to enhance and improve climate actions in the nation, in the state. Okay. So finally, an important contribution will come, I think, by private sector and business context. COP21 and also Agenda 2030 stimulated, pushed the role played by companies, by businesses. Okay, why? Because it is an obvious thing if you consider that all companies are affected by climate change. And in order to react and in order to adopt policies and strategies, this contribution by companies may help all countries to achieve this sustainable development goal. Okay, so it is very important that all companies are acting, are doing in relation to these sustainable development goals. Consider that companies and investors know very well that it is very important to realize this transition towards better and more exhaustive non-financial corporate reporting, okay, because it is very important to disclose, to externally disclose climate actions, okay, and it is important to adopt a standardized framework in order to disclose all climate-related policies adopted by companies, okay? And in order to connect financial capital with natural capital, for example. And there are some frameworks in order to help companies to improve this unusual information for a manager, because consider that a manager is used to prepare a financial statement, an income statement, and so on, a cash flow statement, but not a statement on natural capital, on the impact of natural hazard in a specific year, for example. Okay, so this is a new thing, but consider that in all countries, there is a specific movement to enhance this kind of corporate reporting. And it is very important also for investments, also for financial markets, also for banks, in order to access, in order to obtain investments by banks or other financial institutions. Okay, so consider that corporate reporting can represent a crucial link between climate actions and commitment by companies in order to support all countries to achieve this sustainable development goal. I think my time is finished. I think it's quite finished. There are other slides about other concepts. For example, this is a very important document by a task force on climate-related financial disclosures. This is a new thing, because when I started my career, when I teach the financial reporting, but not climate related. Climate risks is the biggest risk for companies now, okay? And also, for example, Larry Fink, because I would like to show you the picture by the head of BlackRock, and he mentioned this word. Climate change has become a defining factor in companies' long-term prospects. Okay, yes, it is the biggest risk, but on the other hand, it may be an important opportunity for companies to achieve a long-term success. Okay, you have to consider these two different sides of the climate action for companies and for investors. Okay, I think, okay, there are other initiatives by the European Commission. I know very well that UK, after Brexit, I don't know if you are checking the European Commission initiatives about the Green Deal and so on, but there are many initiatives on green finance and sustainable finance. And so there are many mechanisms and tools for investors in order to move to green economy, to circular economy, and so on. Okay, and I think this is a very good thing for us. Okay. So this is an example of a company. I'm here for you, for your questions, comments, curiosities, and so on. Thank you. Thank you so much for your attention. And this is main references. This is my my book and also the recent publication on COVID-19. Obviously, we have to consider the current pandemic situation, and there are many considerations about the link between SDG 13 with finance and pandemic situation. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Federica.
5 minutes delay from the
I think it's perfect time.
Okay.
Yeah, it's perfect timing. Thank you again. So let's kick off with some questions from the Q&A tab. And remember that the chat is disabled. So if you have any questions, please write it down in the Q&A tab.
I'm reading the first question. Okay. Can I read?
Yeah, maybe. Okay, just to assist you. So the first question is actually related to what you just finished right now of COVID-19. So has the pandemic had a positive impact on climate change? I think it's a kind of a generic questions. It's not straightforward related to the SDG 13, but and what has changed? Yeah.
Okay. Many things are changing. Okay. I think positive effects, but on the other side, also negative effects. For example, what is the effect? Consider air pollution or also greenhouse gas emissions. Consider, for example, the universities in the world. But for example, my university, consider that many students now are at home. Okay, so my university, I think, is carrying out a green behavior because it is reducing a lot the energy consumption, and this is a very positive effect on climate change, for example. Okay, and also not only universities, but also other companies. Consider that Milan in Italy, there is a high level of greenhouse emissions because it is a big city and no green areas and a lot of air pollution, and especially in some seasons, also during winter, the local authorities may recommend people to stay at home, a part of COVID-19 and the current situation. Okay, so very positive effects in the world during this situation, but on the other hand, consider that all countries are entering or entered in a very difficult crisis. Okay, so consider that many workers maybe will lose their work, and some companies, I'm referring, for example, in Italy, are thinking to close, are thinking to stop their activity. And so the negative impact on our economy may represent a risk for all initiatives by countries in order to consider or in order to invest in this risk. Okay, because there are other urgent aspects to manage for example, in a company, okay, a company for reducing greenhouse gas emission, it has to invest in more sophisticated technologies, okay? But if this company now does not have money, and this is a negative effect, okay, in order to combat climate change, okay? Very, very interesting question. If you want, you can read also my chapter, because I wrote this chapter after during lockdown last year, because 1 year now. Okay. Other questions?
Thank you. Let me check if we have another questions. No, we don't have any questions. Yeah, so before wrapping up, I'd just like to thank Federica for taking the time to give us an insightful and an interesting talk, and all of you for your participation. For those who are interested, there will be more sessions of Transform the Circular Economy taking place at the same time until Friday the 5th. So especially tomorrow, the whole food chef, author Roseanne Stephen, and founder of the Green Outlook, Fiona Semidi, who will be discussing the sustainable products and food waste. So this will be tomorrow. And on Friday, we will be delighted to be joined by Mary Cronin, founder of the innovation agency Upthink, and the president and the founder of Host in Ireland, Gary Connolly. So these will be tomorrow on Friday. Okay. Once again, thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you all again tomorrow. Thank you. Thanks, Federica.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Greetings from Italy.